Hey guys, this is Peony, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to simply draw and shade iris in a few steps. Of course, we had a tutorial about drawing iris before, but this time I'm just going to keep it simple. I use HB for just sketching, and then I switch it with a softer pencil, like a 6B or 4B or whatever you like. Let's start with light outlines. First, let's draw a circle. To draw the circle, hover over your paper as you make circular motions using your elbow and shoulder to move instead of your wrist and fingers. Once you're confident with the shape, lower your pencil till it touches the paper and finish drawing the circle. This is the best way to draw circles freehand. Your construction lines should be very light so that it won't show through when you're adding next layer to the drawing. The next step is to draw the pupil. You can find the middle by drawing a cross through the center. The intersection between the two lines is the center. Locate the very center of your iris and draw a smaller circle. The size of the pupil depends on how much light is entering the eye. It gets wider in the dark and smaller in the light. So the size is up to you and how much light you want or how close is your light source to the object. The next step, which is really important, is to locate your light source. Mine, for example, comes from the top right. This is going to determine how I shade the entire iris and where my highlights and shadows will be. So you can choose whichever direction you want. So I'm going to draw a highlight in my iris in the top right. I'm going to draw a reflection from a rectangular light source, like a window. But you can choose any shape that you want in this step. Circle, square, or even an irregular shape. Since the eyeball is round, the rectangular reflection is going to look kind of curved, like it's been stretched, as it wraps around the curvature of the eyeball. This will help give off the illusion of roundness. Next, let's go ahead and shade the pupil. Shade it as dark as you can. Use your darkest value for this section. If you have a set of pencils, use a soft one like 8B or 6B to shade the pupil. I prefer to use my dark black colored pencil because it creates a great contrast next to the graphites and it makes my pupil really defined. Now let's shade the iris. I changed my pencil to 6B because it's gonna be much easier to work on shadows and at darker values. But you can basically use 2B or 3B or even 4B. It's up to you. Before shading, make sure your pencil tip is not scratchy and thin. Scribble it on a piece of paper until your strokes become thicker and then use it to shade. My light source comes from the top right, as I mentioned. The iris shape is concave. So the top is actually facing away from the light, whereas the bottom of the iris faces towards the light. So I'm gonna shade the top right side darker, right above the light reflection box, since the top lid always casts a shadow on top of the iris, unless we have a light source from below. Shade along the very top of the iris to account for cast shadow that is being casted down from the top eyelid. Keep your strokes as close together as possible and shade in a consistent way to have an even layer of graphite all over your drawing for the base layer. This will make the surface smoother and you can easily put graphite on the next layer and have a less grainy look. Of course, keep the highlights intact. And over here, the iris curves back out. It gradually faces towards the light, so we have to add gradation to create a soft transition in values. and avoid creating any rough or sharp shadows. Blend the graphite as you apply each layer, and definitely before you add any fine details. Shade the rim of the iris even darker than the iris body to give it more contrast, so that it looks even more defined. Add even darker values to shadow zones until they're as dark as you like. And don't forget to fade your shadows into the midtones and the midtones into the highlights. Simply just add gradation. As I work my way down, I'm applying less pressure to get a gradient to give the illusion of a concave shape to my drawing. Shade around the outside of the pupil if you want the area to look deeper. Let's add some additional details to the iris, but not exactly like what we did in the previous iris tutorial, because as I mentioned, we want to keep it simple this time, as if you're looking at the eyes from a distance or in a darker environment, and the details are not that visible to us, and the iris patterns are less defined. For the details, draw some faint lines that radiate from the center of the pupil. Your strokes should be randomly spaced instead of evenly spaced, to give it more irregular pattern and be less predictable. Start from the center of the pupil and extend your strokes out. Make them look random. Vary the length and thickness of each stroke. For highlight areas, in this part, start your strokes from both sides and bring them in as you get closer to the highlights. Feather out the end of each stroke so that it fades out nicely. Try to angle and space out some of your lines randomly and vary the thickness to make them look more natural. To make the iris look more detailed, you can add some fine details, such as lines that stretch outward from the center. Use your pencil and eraser to render these lines. If you want to draw some straight lines for the highlights, you can flatten your kneaded eraser and then just press and lift the graphite away. Use your pencil to darken some of these spaces in between your lines to add some depth and contrast. You can add some dots between these lines and textures, because some eyes have these dotted patterns inside of the iris, but that's optional, of course. And for the final step, add some irregular curved lines inside this highlight box to show the reflection of the lashes on the cornea to get a realistic effect. You can use different shades and different grades of your pencil to draw the lashes. And that's it for today's tutorial. Hope you find it useful, and I'd be glad to hear your suggestions and idea for the next topics. Take care guys, see you soon!